I don't think many of us realize how separated we have become from truth, from what it really means to be on this planet.
Sometimes pain is functional because it has an objective. You need to go through that to get a transformation.
Like when we talk about decolonizing, it's not like we're undoing colonialism, because we can't.
And so self-care is an act of resistance as a community, and that's where it started.
How to kind of be able to hold the space for all of those feelings, but to hold it towards the system that we created and not towards the people.
Hello Arzu. Hello Poppy.
Hiya.
And hello to all our listeners and viewers. And here we are for another episode of Design to Connect and of our healing season. So, if someone doesn't know, Design to Connect is a podcast that is exploring architecture and urban design. Yes, that's what we do from new perspective, and we love to look at it in like from weird angles or for something that people will call weird angles. And what happened like a couple of months ago, we sat down with our friend Poppy and we thought it would be great to talk about healing.
Why not?
Yes, why not? And because we would love to talk about healing not only from an individual point of view, but also as a way that bring us and connect us to our community and to our world around. So, what happened so far? We talked about healing in general. Then we did a workshop on art, music, and healing. And then we explore what fashion and self expression means when it comes to healing. And today we are really excited to be talking about design.
Yeah.
And we have two amazing guests. But before we get into the guest, pass the I'll pass you a ball, a virtual ball to Poppy.
Sure. Thank you, Khadija and Arizu, for having me on this. And I'm really excited for the conversation today with Sabrina and Maya, who we just did an introduction, and I was like, oh, I've got so many things firing off in my head to ask you both. So I'm glad to be able to spend this Friday evening where I am to just wind down the weekend and transition from what's been a very busy week into what will hopefully be a very relaxing and fun weekend. It's Mother's Day this weekend, and my youngest daughter turned 24 this week. So we're celebrating all of that, and my family is celebrating Eid. So I think we're trying to see how we do it all. So it's going to be interesting. But I'm loving this pause, and which is a relevant work, because one of the projects that we're going to be talking about is Pause and Effect, which Sabrina founded. But I just wanted to say a little bit about the connection from the previous session and this session, where last session we talked about fashion and expression, and how do we individually dress and express ourselves, and what does that actually mean when we present ourselves in the world, and is it always possible to present ourselves to the world in the way that we want to, and how do we hide behind clothes and garments? And we had two amazing women on the podcast, and I really hope, I really encourage everybody to listen to it. But one of our guests last week was a lady called Vic, and she is a power chair user. And when we sat with her and looked at the way that she talked about dressing, and actually how limited her world is because of the shape and size of her body, and the fact that she literally can't go and grab something off the rail, and one of the things that she said that made me cry actually last session was that when she came to one of my sari fun shops, she felt stunning, and she has never felt stunning in her life. And I was really moved by that because I had no idea when I was starting this work around saris, and my belief that sari is the most inclusive garment in the world because it's just one long unstitched piece of cloth, and actually the art of draping is what makes it your garment. And being able to drape a sari on Vic's body, I just had no idea that that was the impact that it was going to have on her. So it really turned us into thinking about healing and expression. And today we've got two fantastic guests, and I really want to dive deeper into the idea of decolonizing and what does design mean in that from that perspective. As an Asian woman and a British Bangladeshi woman, that question is something that I have increasingly tried to understand, because it was never part of my education in this country. I had no idea what the colonial history of my ancestors were until I was about 30, and I visited Bangladesh and stood on the ground seeing art and hearing stories that I had no idea were part of my history, and the shame that that filled me with, but also then the curiosity to do better and lean into my heritage and my culture and show up in a different way. So I hope that gives you a bridge into what we've done so far, what we hope to set the tone of today's next hour or so, where we're going to be unpacking some of these things. We will have, one thing I can guarantee is that there will be no answers at the end of this, but what we'll hope that we will do is we'll get to understand what healing might mean to us as individuals. And if from that listeners can gain something that resonates with them, then I feel like we're all moving as a community. And I think community healing has got to be the way forward, where we listen and understand, and we're listened to not respond. We listen to not just understand and appreciate, but we listen to feel. And that was something that I don't think we do enough. So with that, I'll hand back to you, I think, Arizu, and then we can kick off with our wonderful guests.
Yeah. And yeah, I was listening to all of you, and I listened to feel. So now I'm having many, many feelings. And as you were talking, Poppy, like it made me remember, like, for how many years I hated my own ancestry and like being a Persian and being a Middle Eastern. And how through the years that has changed. And I really, it's been a very strange process because yeah, through media and design and really everything for years, we've been shamed to who we are, and really getting out of that shame can be sometimes really difficult. I'll open a very small parenthesis. I teach to American students, and last week it was Nowruz, so I wanted to, share my culture. So I bought flowers to, kind of celebrate Nowruz, and some cookies to take to the class. For sure, if it was 5 years ago, I would never do that because I would be too scared. But still, I did that, and I did it very scared because I was thinking, if the students eat the cookies and they have food poisoning, maybe they think because I was an Iranian, I tried to, poison them. And it's a very strange thought, but it's really these really everyday kind of thought processes that we go through, like, a lot of shame, a lot of fear, a lot of and I realized that because of all of those shames, I have to question my every action. And it became a little bit normal for me because, I don't know any other ways to live. But when, I take a moment, I really realize that I don't, like, nothing comes out of my mouth, or I don't do any action before, like, I have questioned myself for hours. But really going to the topic of today, which is design. And research and how we can, kind of free ourselves, how we can liberate ourselves from the ways that we've been doing design. And we've been taught that it's the only way to imagine the world. This episode is really going to be, about questioning the ways that we've done things. And I think the way how we've taken some ideas as the truth, as the absolute truth, and how really questioning those things that for years we thought, are the only ways to do things, and are the civilized ways to do things or the correct ways to do things, can be really the answer to come up with ways of creating a world, really world creating that is more caring, more compassionate, and more loving for all. And when we are talking about all, we are not just talking about, a part of humanity, as a lot of sustainability, let's say, activities are right now, or even when we're talking about inclusion, but really talking about truly, all humanity and all beings on the planet and the planet itself. And the practice that we are going to talk to, and I mean there are two humans with the name of practice of cause and effect, are really doing that, and doing that by addressing the roots. And as we talked, through the last episodes in this season and through Design to Connect, it's really important that we don't only react to the problems that exist in our world. We are facing a lot of crises, and we might sometimes just get entangled, in that emergency solutions of just answering to those crises and just reacting to our environment. But as positive effect is beautifully doing, it's really important that, as we are reacting, because it's needed, we are also actively engaging and actively building the world that we want to see. So that is going to be one of the themes that we would talk about today. And I've been following Sabrina and Maya's work for some years now, and I love how their work is really informed by interconnectedness of all things in our world, because that's like the truth of our words. And the interconnectedness of all beings on the planet that we are living. And from really, this idea that we need to liberate ourselves and heal ourselves from the value systems that are so deep put within us. So Sabrina and Maya, they come from two and many different and interesting backgrounds. They bring research and community building and design and fashion and years of work experience to their work. But not only that, they are bringing a lot of themselves and their stories and their memories to their work. That is really important. And, it's a part of healing process as well, because we've been taught, that also work and self are two separate things. And, you should almost have separate personalities for when you come to work, kind of disassociate from your reality. And so it's really important what they're bringing to their work from, their backgrounds and their stories. And Sabrina is the descendant of Sindhi Muslim Gujaratis, that her ancestors are from there, and they had to go through forced migration, and they've been living through years in East Africa, and now living in the land that we call Canada. And Maid's identity is shaped by their background as a Muslim immigrant from Persian, I'm going to say woohoo, and Afghan and Indian and Pakistani heritage, and their experience of queerness, disability, and neurodivergence. So there are a lot of layers there. There are a lot of beautiful, beautiful things there. A lot of stories, and I think all of those stories have also a lot of depth in how we connect to people and how we connect to land. So I'll stop talking. So hi, Sabrina and Mayet, how are you? Welcome.
Thank you. So lovely to be here. Hello.
Yeah, thank you for the intros. And excited to kind of dive into the conversation.
Yeah, I think it's time for that. I think I
Yes,
talked a lot.
let's.
Yes, let's do that. So, as we talked about decolonization, okay, um, we would love to know, what does that word mean to you in your everyday life? What are the things you faced maybe through your life when it comes to that word, and how do you try to, yeah, decolonize yourself? How do you do that on an everyday basis? Maybe sometimes we don't have the energy to do it every day, but yeah.
Sure.
Whoever wants to go first, yeah, please.
Do you want to go first, Sabrina?
Sure, I can start and then, yeah, feel free to jump in. Um, it's such a big word, right? Decolonization. And I think we can get wrapped up in terminology and like vocabulary and meaning. And what I really believe decolonization is about becoming or moving into better relationship, into healthy relationship, into truth with the land, with ourselves, with our communities, with histories, with the host nations or the stewards of the lands that we're on. And it means almost heeding to the wisdom that is inherent and lives within our bodies and our spirits. Um, Turning off, I think, or becoming aware of the conditioning and the narratives that we have absorbed over generations, which is really difficult work. I think something to say about this is that perfectionism is a colonial uh, tactic strategy. And it can often feel like we have to, like there is one path to decolonization or that there is a right way. And I really would challenge that and encourage us to think about this process as emergent, and as something that is spanning over generations, because it has taken generations to create such an entrenched, deeply colonial society. And so, yeah, I approach this work with a lot of grace. I approach this work with humility and with a desire to remember and reclaim that which has been deliberately and intentionally lost or erased, stolen. Um, and I do it with knowing that there is no perfect and there is not one right way of approaching this work. For me, what that tangibly looks like is recognizing, first becoming aware of the ways in which coloniality informs and shapes how we live. Um, what are the rules that we've chosen to believe or that have been enforced upon us, and how do they sever us from relationship?
Mhm.
Once we become aware of that, I think it opens up a lot of opportunities to start thinking about how we can live in ways that challenge those norms and those narratives. But it isn't easy because we live in a carceral system that punishes dissent, and yeah, actions that go against the grain in a way. So I think that's why I say approach this work with grace, because it doesn't happen overnight. It happens gradually and slowly, and it happens through a lot of discomfort. Arzu, you were sharing before about some of the, risks that you took around bringing the cookies to your, American students for No Rose, and some of the fears that you felt. Like, to me, that is how we're actively challenging and combating systems. That's also how we are remembering and reclaiming that which we've been, separated from. So that's how I would answer that question.
Love it. Thank you.
Yeah, absolutely. I think a lot of common threads to kind of pull on, but I think the first thing for me is kind of how separated we are from our own stories. And I say this as someone who seemingly grew up on the land of my ancestors, but even
Mm.
you could challenge, what does that mean? Because when I grew up in Pakistan, like when partition happened in 1947, 1948, it was like just absolute another chaos, and people kind of just split across these artificially constructed borders that were inherently violent as well. So I think a lot about that, and the fact that I can't actually go visit like India because I can't get a visa. So I think about that too, where it's like the right of return in that context. And yeah, so like the first framing was that growing up on those lands, yet still being disconnected from my own stories, histories, ancestral wisdom, knowledge systems. And the other thing was, I know this was said earlier, I think, Poppy, when you were talking about like not knowing. And I feel like I still didn't know despite growing up there in many ways, because even like the history that was taught to us in schools was like a really intentionally like washed history that like continued to perpetuate coloniality and almost justify it in many ways, or like look at like, oh, look at all the good things that colonialism has brought to us, like we have these like train systems now, and
Yeah.
like we have this now, and I'm like, what has it taken from us though? And that has been like a constant process of reclamation, right? And the other aspect of that is like in my own like ancestral histories, there's just layers and layers of displacement. And one of the things that is very prevalent for me right now is language loss. Because part of my ancestry is originally from Persia, but like centuries ago, before they were kind of displaced to what is now like Afghanistan, India, Pakistan, and that region, but I don't speak Farsi. And even though Farsi was spoken in my family up until one generation ago, it was just like it skipped a generation and that language has been lost. And we have all these family stories, archives, memories that are preserved, but they're all inaccessible to me because of loss of language in itself. And I think that's an intentional form of violence that, you know, is perpetuated by colonialism as well, is to kind of separate us from what we've always known to be true, and things that we will find to be grounding and healing and offer resistance to like dominant systems and narratives. So I think I see it as two layers. Like first it's that reclamation piece, right? And then remembrance as well, where it's like, what can we turn back to? And sometimes just allowing ourselves, because I feel like there's always this narrative around linear progress that I was taught, where it's like, oh, we're pushing forward, and this desire to like, and it comes from modernity, right? Where it's like, oh, progress forward is the way to go, and like new is better. And I always try to challenge that, because I'm like, there's a lot of richness, abundance, complexity that has already existed in the lineages, the stories that all of us come from. And sometimes it's really grounding to just like surrender to that, right? And let ourselves see control and be like, well, let those histories and that knowledge and that wisdom carry us through these moments when we're trying to defy colonial systems. So yeah, I think to me that's really how I'm understanding decolonizing and what that means. The last thing I'll say is a lot of my perspective shifted as well when I kind of immigrated to quote unquote the United States. And that was only like in 2019, so still fairly recent. And I think that first generation immigrant experience is also kind of inviting me to reconcile with now being on stolen lands and knowing that that in itself, like presence, settler presence in itself is violent as well in many ways. And what does it mean to kind of really try to live and be present in a way that isn't further harmful to the indigenous communities here, and then deconstructing the nation state, right? Because that is the form of violence itself, right? In its entirety. So yeah, I would say like those are some, and I know that like mapped out a lot of different things we can go into, but yeah, that's where I'll leave it at for now.
Thanks, Matt. One of the thoughts that's come up for me as you were both speaking is that, and not just that, just the context of not just what you have said, but that's really brought it to the forefront of my mind. Is there's so much that needs healing, right? And there's something about like how much of that do we carry, and how much of that can we actually affect. And to your point a moment ago, Sabrina, about it's slow, and it's the decolonizing, I guess. I'm using from what you both said, I'm seeing decolonizing as synonymous with healing. And but it's seems to take a lot in order to get through to the other side. So my question is on that track, really. What needs to heal, and how could design help in that? And maybe if I go to you first, Sabrina, and I've got a slightly different question for you in a minute, Maya, but and how have you done that through the organization that you've founded as well? It'd be really good to sort of understand a little bit of that as well.
Yeah. I'll start. There's a few questions in there. So I'll start with the first, which was what needs to heal. And immediately the first thing that came to my mind is relationship. Relationship needs to heal. And I don't think many of us realize how separated we have become from truth, from what it really means to be on this planet in a human body. We are so deeply entangled and interconnected with everything that is, and yet we live lives that enforce the separation, the sense of separation. I think to arrive at a place of healing, we first have to grieve. There's so much to grieve. And I think when we really realize and confront complicity in this too, because complicity is a really painful thing to sit with. I know we talked a lot about like how we have been separated from, which is another piece to grieve, but also how we have upheld what we have done to our mother, the land, and if we really sit with that grief, it feels so overwhelming, so heavy. And what we continue to do because our survival is attached to those things, is really painful. And so I want to just acknowledge that too, that this process of healing isn't the way that it has been marketed and sold to us under the, colonial Western care industrial complex. It is painful, and it requires community in this process as well. Like this is not for us to take on alone, and to sit with our own complicity and just feel like we're shitty people, and and deal with that. But it's actually, this process of reckoning needs to be done with community, and it needs to be done with practicing what it means to be in relationship. And that is healing to me. What does it mean to be in relationship? So that can look as small as, how do we greet the birds and the trees as we go for our walk outside? And how do we feel when the sun hits our skin? What is the relationship in these moments? It can be how we deal and navigate conflict with one another, how we deal with disagreement. What happens when you see a post on social media that you don't really like? Like, how do you engage? There's so many little things. How do you deal with the disputes in your family? How do you raise children? How do you think of the concept of pets? And like, what do you think about that? There's just so many things that we need to really like sit with and untangle and heal and repair in relationship first. And I think the way that this shows up in what we do at Pause and Effect is along the same lines. We are always oriented into relationships. So whether we're talking about design or research, we're talking about how do we be in better relationship So in the research process, we can talk about what does it mean to practice research in a relationally responsible way. Sometimes that means don't do the research.
Yeah.
What does it mean to design in a relationally responsible way? Sometimes it means you're not the one to design. Sometimes it means taking full accountability for the implications of what you design. Sometimes it means thinking about whose knowledge you center, and whose knowledge we've been taught to center. Sometimes it means reckoning with our attachment to control and ownership. There's a lot there, right? But all of it kind of leads back to this idea of healing and repairing relationship. But it isn't a quick solve.
Yeah.
And I think that's why when I hear the word healing and how it's being used in modern society, is it's often branded as quick fixes to things that are centuries old that need tending to and that need presence. And that needs so much care, and the process of grief is part of that as well.
Before I ask a question to Mad,
Oh, no,
sorry.
I was.
Are you gonna
Yeah.
go? Go on,
Yeah,
please.
and then I'll give you back there.
Yeah, sure.
Oh, there are so many things I
So
want
many
to
things.
talk
Let's
about,
how
but
did
I'll just focus on one. Because I think as you were talking about how we are disconnected, like the disconnection start from our bodies, like first. So like we think our mental part is completely disconnected to our feelings. And actually something I'm learning now. We talk about a lot, and you were talking about pain. And sometimes now, whatever we do when we feel pain is we need just to let go, and we don't need to feel
Distract.
pain. But it's different when pain is something, I don't know, it's like toothache. You need to go to the dentist and fix it. But sometimes pain is functional because it has an objective. Like it's not, you are not in pain because it's something that you need to go through that to get a transformation. I mean, I'm thinking about delivery. So now delivery is something that it's if you feel pain, you don't need to feel pain. But actually the pain in delivery, it's what you need to then meet your baby. This is just one example. And it's so connected also with what Maya was saying, progress. Progress is not linear, and we are not linear. We are so much circular. So it will be also nice when it comes to research and talking about ourselves and our bodies. Of course, especially women, but not only women. We are all just always going back square one and then circling back. And I think it's a lot, but I feel, as you were saying, it's a process, so we have to go through it and find a way to adjust ourselves every time we feel uncomfortable, and then probably go back to feel uncomfortable. But it's just relationship and how we relate then with others will help us going through that. Being uncomfortable. Sorry, Poppy. Was not a question, just a reflection.
I love that reflection. Sorry, this is the thing, isn't it, about Zoom? Like, in back in the day, we'd be interrupting each other all the
Yeah.
time, and flowing, but it's not. So I love what you've just said, Khadija, and what came to my mind as you were saying that was, the difference between empathy and compassion is action from my perspective. So, we can empathize with each other's pain, each other's experiences, joy, sadness. But it's when we take action that we become compassionate, and that action doesn't, to Sabrina's point, it doesn't have to be, I'm going to go and protest, and that action could just be sitting and noticing. Just and really feeling what's happening, because that creates a change on a cellular level. I think that we don't have to meaning make it, just unravels. So that's really interesting to me. But Mad, when you were talking, one of the things that you were saying about is taking notice of the land that you're on and the history that it holds, and actually us being settlers in many ways in where we're at. And it really made me think about being a Bangladeshi woman and how, as a woman, my British identity serves me well because it gives me privileges that my cousins and sisters who are in Bangladesh don't experience because I have, I have a job, I have freedom to go wherever not quite wherever I like, but I have more freedom than them to actually travel. I have agency because of the education that I was able to access. So the migration of my family, and I'm third generation in this country. So my granddad was recruited as part of East India Company, and he then worked 20 years in the Merchant Navy, bringing the spices and all of those cottons and everything else over. So, you could look at that and think, what role did he play in colonialism, enhancing the financial gains? But actually, he too was enslaved by that process. But at the same time, it served our family well because it meant that he's here. Then dad came over, and then mum came over. I came. So in many ways it serves us, and I guess I just wanted to really hear I just loved what you said, and I just want to get into that subject a little bit more. Complicity, how does it serve us, and what scars or what impact, positive or negative, does that leave with us?
Yeah. I really love that reflection and question too, Poppy. I think there's a lot to unpack there around complicity. And I know, Sabrina, you were talking about complicity as well. And I feel like the first piece that jumps out to me is just like acknowledging nuance. And I know it's hard to kind of have these discussions when a lot of it is weaponized, like the narratives are weaponized against us again. Because anytime, like, I've tried to have real conscientious discussions around, like, what was the role of people, local people, in like further enhancing British colonialism in the subcontinent, because there was class disparity, right? And there were people that weren't impacted in the same ways because they you could say sold out to the British, or like they were only looking out for themselves. And like there's a lot to kind of think about. But like anytime you try to have that conversation in mainstream dominant frameworks, then that's weaponized, because then people will be like, well, see, colonialism isn't bad then, right? Because you're saying like your people were also part of it. And I'm like, that doesn't justify all of the horrors of colonialism and the violence that many of us have had to experience, right? And like you said, like there's even something inherently violent about being indentured to that process when you still gain from it, yet you're still harmed by it. And I think that's the type of complexity and nuance that we need to acknowledge in this work. And I think one thing that I can share that's been really unsettling for me in this past year is I just became a naturalized citizen in June in the United States. And that's been really unsettling for many different reasons. And I think the first one has been the difference of how I'm treated when I'm trying to even cross borders anymore. Because it's like a world of a difference that I can't even explain if you're traveling on a Pakistani passport or if you're traveling on a US passport. And I still hold both. And then also recognizing that's still a very fine line, because I still will never be considered American, and I'm not. Like even my passport says like born in Pakistan, and that in itself is used as a target on your back constantly. So I think about that where it's like it has afforded me a degree of privilege within a colonial system, and yet that privilege is in many ways an illusion. When, especially at a time like this, it's like it's shattering any myth of like, do you act what type of power do you have? So when I think about that, why I'm sharing that is complicity, I think, is something really important to reconcile with, because it allows us to bring complexity and nuance to these discussions back and recognize like what do I do with the ounce of privilege that I have been afforded, because I do have more privilege than people, even most of my family back home. and just like freedom of movement in a way, like, I can get into more places, like I don't need visas, I'm not denied or rejected. And it's just like, even thinking of all those things, and yet I know it's a fine line, like a very thin veil of privilege, and yet it still exists. So now the question becomes, what do you do with that, right? And I think that's really what I've been trying to intentionally focus on, is how do I not assimilate myself to like the nation state. And that was part of where I was going with earlier, where it's like understanding settler identity, what that means. Because I think even the term settler is kind of really, it's a loaded term, right? And we usually equate it with like outright people who are colonizing in like a very like, just like, open way, versus like not even recognizing that like even people that immigrate here, they're still like I still see myself as a settler, even though like I'm here because of a variety of reasons that are very complex. But it's still like the presence of settlers is essential to maintaining the settler colonial state. And that's the piece that I've been really reconciling with, is um, again, that's not to say like, oh, it's just like, everyone's shitty. And like, we talked about this,
Yeah.
but it's definitely to say that we do need to complicate our understanding of how do we relate, what are our relationships with the nation state, right? And when we start to really decenter that, I think that is when we're actually truly decolonizing and moving away from the dominance and the omnipresence rather, of the colonial systems that we've been steeped in and taught to accept as reality, right?
Yeah, and can you give an example of how you are actively in your world, in your life, in you, resisting assimilation? Because it kind of just happens, doesn't it? Sometimes if you're not conscious. So, what do you? How do you? Give one example of maybe when it's come up for you and you've gone, no, I've noticed that and I'm moving in a different direction.
Yeah, no, I think that's a really good question. I feel like there's just scales, right, too, where it's like sometimes it's a really small shift. Like I had a really profound moment, like it was like 5, 6 years ago. I was in like a community space, and you never really expect. And one of my mentors, she's Iranian, and everyone was writing their name, and she wrote her name in Farsi. And I was just like really like shook by that experience, because I was like, why did I write my name in English? Like, because no one asked me to. And it's like I was writing it for myself. It was just like everyone was given a sheet of paper. The prompt was write your name on top of it. And I was sitting next to her. She wrote her name in Farsi, and that stopped me to be like, well, why am I conforming to the language of the colonizer? And like my relationship with English is very complicated, because I've learned it as a third language, but I've learned it since I was like, since whenever you start learning a language, right? And yet still like it will never be my language, because even like once I moved here, people would keep asking questions like, oh, but like why do you speak English so well, and blah blah blah. It's like, all those that will always stay, like no matter how like further I can get in my career, that experience will never leave me, because at the end of the day, like I
Yep.
will never be accepted. So to me, assimilation is just like sometimes in those tiny moments of like I am refusing to like conform, basically. And it's just like sometimes it's just like little acts of defiance. Other times it's just like even one very small shift is like acknowledging like where I am, right? Like whose lands are these, and like bringing that into every space. And sometimes it's really awkward, right? Like sometimes like you go into the most corporate space ever, and they're just like staring at you when you're talking about, when I'm like, oh, Chicago, and like I put the quotes, or like I to actually talk about the histories of these lands, and then people are like, but it's like it's not like, I think there is the performativity aspect of like land acknowledgements, but at the same time, I see that as something very deeper, where it's like we're refusing to accept what we've been shoved, right? And that to me feels really important. So whether it's like language, stuff around food, because like food was a big one for me actually, because I think a lot of narratives were like, oh, just switch to like Mediterranean European like diets because they're healthier. And or like even medicine at times was like, now I've been really intentionally thinking about like all of the wisdom that has been preserved, right? Like when your mom or your grandmother's like, oh, drink turmeric and milk before you go to bed, or like, eat oranges. Like, and I would make fun of that as a kid, where I'm like, what do you mean eat oranges? Like, that's not gonna help me get over like being sick or something. But like now I see like there is wisdom preserved in that. And I think part of reclamation has been that too, is like not like not downplaying that wisdom myself, because oftentimes we end up reinforcing coloniality. And I think the subcontinent is a great place to think about that because it's a post-colonial society. That's how people want to frame it. But I'm like, the colonizers left, but who's colonizing us now? It's us. Like we are colonizing ourselves. We're upholding the colonial norms. And that to me is like something that has to be kind of deconstructed actively, right? And like to kind of address your question.
Yeah, love it. Thank you.
Yeah. I have a personal question, like on how you face some of these things, because I think like all of us have a lot of layers of, like there are a lot of emotions when it comes, to the land we're living, to the system that we are living in. There is a lot of sadness, a lot of grief of what world could have looked like, of grieving what could have been. There's a lot of anger, a lot of fear, and something that like I personally really struggle with is to how to kind of be able to hold the space for all of those feelings, for the anger, for the grief, for the sadness, but to hold it towards the system that we created and not towards the people that are right now living around us and have been, grown in the same system and have been, grown in the same education, in the same culture, media, and all of that. And it's sometimes like very hard to divide the system from the people. And what I feel is that like the only way forward is to be able to, see that division and, not to become another carrier of hate and anger and kind of recreate our own systems of kind of pedestals and power dynamics and all of that. So I don't know if there is an answer, and but yeah, I would love to hear how do you face with that, because yeah, and I said this sentence before too, because again, my husband is Italian, and I a lot of times, kind of vomit my anger on him, uh, because before I came to Europe, I didn't know so many things that right now I know. I even didn't know that I'm not white, because in Iran we were like, okay, so there are people that are yellow skin, like it's East Asia, people that are black, and people that are brown, and we were thinking we are white. And I came to Europe and I understood, okay, this skin color is not, considered white. So a lot of my understanding came, when I was in this context that, yeah, color of the skin is not about color of the skin, and, all of those complexities. So a lot of this realization and anger is recently coming to me, like in the past 7 years, living in Europe. So yeah, how to face with that, and how to not hate people but hate systems.
Yeah.
Oh, well, go ahead. I think we both were just like itching to respond. I actually just wanted to say, like, maybe it's helpful for the listeners to just pause for a second and feel what's in your body. We talk about separation a lot. And, Khadija, you mentioned like separation from the body as part of that by design. So I'm sensing an urgency to respond, but also just knowing that like my body is stirring right now with a lot of emotion and resonance, Arzu, with what you shared and what Maya had shared before, and just like this conversation. There's a lot in this conversation. It's really heavy. So
Mhm.
yeah, just wanting to pause for a breath for a moment.
Thank you.
Yeah, Maya, if you want to start, feel free, and then I'll jump in.
I think the first thing that you said, Arizu, was really important. Like grieving the I always think about like grieving the possibilities that could have been. And Sabrina, you talked about grief earlier too. And I think that is important, so long as we don't get stuck in that cycle, right? Because I can't like this is always something that happens is like when we talk about decolonizing, it's not like we're undoing colonialism because we can't, right? I think that is important to recognize, like what can we do and what can't we do. And that feels unsettling because it's as much as I'd love to think of possibilities like, oh, if colonialism never happened, but the reality is we're here and we're here through centuries and generations of this. I think the systems part is really intriguing. Because personally, I feel like I try to balance between, yes, like how do you kind of tug at systems while being gentler with people? Because I can understand that, like, even for me, sometimes it was hard to kind of really unsettling to just in the context that I currently live in to kind of see like the amount of dehumanizing rhetoric and narratives that just like everyday people um hold in the United States context, and they hold those opinions and perspectives so deeply about places they don't even know exist or they can't even point out on a map most of the times. And I'm like, how have you dehumanized entire groups and communities of people? And it's baffling to me to the point where I'm like, I could punch a wall down, right? And there is anger, there is rage, and I don't think that's a negative emotion. It's something to kind of tend to in its own right. But the other thing is like, I always struggle with this a lot too, where it's like systems, yes, but also systems. Because on the flip side, I see a lot of people being like, let's blame the system without actually implicating ourselves. Because I'm like, the system doesn't exist. When
Yeah.
we talk a lot about systems of oppression. Like I think it's a
It's
term that
us.
it is us, right? And I think that's the piece that I've also been trying to balance, where it's like it will take time, and part of that for me is like I don't have to be part. So for me, it's like turning away, right? So for example, it's like I don't have to be a part of someone's healing journey or like their deconstruction of the system that they've been steeped in, especially when they're like reproducing dehumanizing rhetoric and erasure, right? So it's like I don't have to engage with you, yet I can not be reproducing that like punishment or carceral norms to you, and like we can kind of go our separate ways is like what I think. So sometimes to me it's like really just about turning away, right? And even in the context of like the nation state, I'm like realistically at this point, what I can do is start thinking of alternatives and reinvesting my time and capacity in different relationships, different communities, different ways of organizing and being. And I think that to me, that speaks a lot more to me these days than like trying to deconstruct, especially in the context that I'm living in, because I'm like, we're just going through a really violent time where empire is collapsing and it's like kind of self imploding. And to me, it's like, do I just be present there for that? Or do I continue to kind of re, yeah, like build, reinvest, um, resurgence, right? And I think that's where like I feel like I'm grounding myself right now. and kind of anchoring, because that feels a lot more healing. It feels what I need right now and what people around me need. And sometimes the answer isn't just to like, because I think that's the other thing. We've been constantly told to like fight back and push. But sometimes I've been thinking about like, what happens if you pull away, right? And then let it kind of fall on its own. So that also is something that I've been really thinking about, where it's like, how do we, for lack of a better phrase, how do we pick our battles, right? And yeah, sometimes the answer really is just turning away. And because we can't fix, like, I can't fix, like, or like help people unlearn everything that they've been steeped in through, like, since before they were born, actually, whether it's like the families they were born in, like media, like culture, like everything. I can't do that for every single person around me that I come across. But I can do that for myself and model that for other people if they want to engage in that too. So that to me feels a lot more achievable, or like a process that I can kind of commit to and hold myself accountable to, and actually like really start deconstructing like what it means to, like, exist in a colonized imagination. Yeah.
I'll just add a little bit to that. I feel the first thing that came up, Arzu, when you were sharing, was about how shame is a tool of the oppressor. And I think about how we try to oftentimes shame each other into action or into change. And so I've been thinking about what other approaches there are to shaping change and making change. And some of that, to Maya's point, is, choosing where you want to put your energy. And there is no wrong answer to that. People are helpful in all sorts of capacities, in all sorts of ways, and we need that. Where do you want to put your energy? Some of the work is more emotionally heavy lifting, especially to hold those spaces with the compassion and the care that it needs, while at the same time navigating your own body. Because what you were saying about, like, we're all in different journeys in different places of this unlearning and of this process. So while we've all started somewhere, sometimes when you, especially, like, I think about this a lot too, how much I have changed in the last 5 years. Like, it's a lot. And I now feel like it's so difficult for me to engage in conversations with where I was at 5 years ago. And the amount of grace and patience that I require in order to do that is a lot. And so there are times where I will, and there are times where I won't. And knowing your own capacity for that is, I think, really important. Yeah, and I think it's this whole thing on policing ourselves in this, and policing each other, is something that I think is also important for us to be aware of too, because there's a difference between that and holding people accountable. And I think what we're really wanting is to hold people accountable for their actions, but not police them in a way. And I think that's a really important distinction. Yeah, there's another thought that I had, but I'll probably come back to it later.
Thank you. I appreciate both of your answers. Thank you so much.
A couple of reflections, but I think
Okay.
Khadija, you want to get in.
Oh, I have a question, so you can reflect first if you.
So I just thought about what you've just said around knowing your own capacity, and the idea of self-care came to mind. And I might have said this in one of the healing seasons already, but I'm just going to say it again, because I feel like it's really important to say. So when you look at the modern narrative of self-care, it's yoga and bath bombs, right? So it's like it's become a marketing tool, and um and but when the original concept of self-care came out of the civil rights movement, where the Black Panthers recognized that their healthcare was not a priority in the system that they were in, that that women in the community were suffering hugely from not being able to deliver babies safely, to mental health of the community. The list goes on. I don't need to explain that any further. So they coined self-care as a term, as a community, which was being self-care is radical because it means that we can resist together better. And that means that we are going to bring in doctors that are going to look after our people. We're going to create groups where we can process stuff together. And so self-care is an act of resistance as a community, and that's where it started. Then the medical profession took self-care, and particularly in places in the mental health world where patient autonomy wasn't a thing. And patient autonomy around the world is still not a thing. If you're a doctor, you know better than everybody else, regardless of who you are, what you say. So your doctor's frame of reference, depending on what your upbringing is, then means you treat people the way that you treat, and we know that is far from perfect. So the medical system then adopted self-care, and it became about patient autonomy, and it became about actually giving people back the power that they can care for themselves and heal themselves. And it wasn't just about medicalizing, which is some of the stuff that Matt talked about earlier about, oranges and turmeric milk, that's been passed down for generations, that we learned that wasn't modern or funky enough. And we're now going back to, and actually, chai latte is being served and turmeric latte is being served, and
Super expensive, by the way.
yeah, and actual shit, actually, from what you would make.
Yeah.
So I think, and then self-care turned into, over the last sort of 20, 30 years, what we now know it to be. But the true essence of self-care was community care. And I just really thought, knowing your capacity and knowing our limitations, the fragmentation of us thinking that self-care is me just looking after myself and making sure that all of that is really important. I practice yoga, so I'm like for all of that, right? But also self-care is about how I am connecting and supporting my community. And when I do that, we know the science says that you're physiologically, it's called a helper's high. So you feel a difference in a positive way in your mental health, but it also forms connection, and it also binds us, and it does much more than what if I was just taking care of myself and my body would do. So we need both. That was one thing that came to my mind. And the other thing that Khadija, that just came to my mind was about privilege and colonial imprints that's been left, and how we resist some of that. So I'll just give you a short anecdote about saris. So the sari, or shari, so it's quite interesting, again, the word, right? So in Bangla we would say shari, but the word sari has been adopted in the UK, and it's a colonial understanding. It's a post-colonial word that even though when I'm speaking to all my family, I go shari, I say sari in because it's an English word. It's become an Englishified word. So even that, I have to consciously remind myself what is my language and what is the word that I'm using. But anyway, so the shari can be worn in many, many ways. And people say, after we sometimes in my workshops get into a discussion about appropriation. And I share with people that the nivi drape, which is the drape that most people will be familiar with. It's got the pleats at the pallu, and the asol goes over the right hand. That drape was created by two women who were incensed by the fact that they weren't allowed in the balls that the British were holding, because they weren't appropriately dressed, because their saris were too see-through, yada yada. So two women, a Farsi woman and a Bengali woman, came together, highly educated, upper class, assimilating in the British circles, and they came up with the nivi drape, which has a petticoat and a blouse as well. And that was their act of resistance. They then published how you create drape the nivi drape in the local fashion magazines, so that the middle class women who were reading them were able to drape in that sari style. And then that was one way of getting into the rooms in their own country that they weren't allowed in. But what's quite interesting to me is that is the youngest drape out of the draping series, but it's a post-colonial drape, and we've unpacked a little bit what post-colonialism mean. So I often will wear the shari in what I saw my daddy and my women in my village in Bangladesh wear the shari. And I remember even last year when I went to Bangladesh, I was asking. We have a caretaker family in our home, because most of our family are all over the world, and the caretaker family are usually poorer people, lower social class, and so who live in the houses of privileged, rich, wealthy people that have moved away. So I was saying to Moya, who is about my mum's age, teach me how your drape is, and she was like, "What are you doing? You can't wear that drape." And I was like, "But I love it." And they were like, and I already know, but I was playing with her. So when I wear the Moya's drape, the village women's drape in this country, and go to visit my family, the aunties and are like, "What are you doing? What are you doing? Like, why are you dressed like the help?" Um, and so for me, that's my act of resistance, because but again, how privileged am I, right? Because if Moya means auntie, by the way, for anybody, it's not her name because she's my elder. If she was wearing the nivi drape, the middle class women would be rolling their eyes and going, "Look, she's above her station. Look at her."
Yeah.
So for me, that is a very gentle and fun way to bring awareness to the women in my family, their internalized misogyny, discrimination, but also to keep a drape alive that is going. And it's the working drape, because it's really practical. And I'm going to be wearing that. I'm doing the marathon next Sunday, and that's the drape that I will be wearing. And I often pair that drape with a pair of DMs when I'm speaking at conferences and things like that, because that's my mixed heritage, mixed identity coming into play. And people see it and go, "Oh, you wearing it? I thought you were going to wear a shadi." But because people don't recognize, right? So I guess just those two stories, just that whole, what is self-care, and actually it's community care, but also the internalized uh, oppression and the natural resistance that some of us are probably doing without even thinking about it. I thought I'd bring that into the room, because that's what came up in my body at that point, Sabrina.
So many things, but I'll go to the question. Because we talked a lot about our more rooted and personal experience. And I think the fact that we invited you here is also to try to unpack what coloniality did to research and to design, because of course it's not only about the way we feel in our body, the way we connect, but it's also a bit in the way we work, in the way we do research and in the way we do design. While you were talking, Poppy, I was thinking about something really impactful, like the fact that a lot of medical research is done only on one typology of people. And I mean, you can only believe how much that can do, because it means that so many things are only for a white man, cisgender. I mean, there are so many things that have been done, and then we apply to everybody else. And as Mayat was saying, we need also to talk about nuances. And as you, Sabrina, was saying, It's not, it's only also about trying to understand whether to take that research, not taking it. So I would like to know, what do you think about coloniality and when we go into our, our work and research? Whoever wants to go first.
I can start us, and then Mad, you can kind of continue from there. I know we'd have a lot to say on this. We're doing a 5-week cohort on this, so there's a lot. But I guess I will say that when it comes to the term research, what do you think? What do you think of? When it comes to the term researcher, what do you think of?
Laboratory.
Laboratory. Yeah, what do you think a researcher is?
A man on a white with a white coat.
What?
I mean, that's the picture. That's not what. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. And it's so valid, right? These are the images that we're fed. Even if we think, beyond the image, it's like, how is research done? How do we understand how research is done? And there's often a person who carries more power, an individual with more power, who's deciding to investigate a particular subject or subjects. The people who are, there's people or there's more than human beings that are participants in this research, where information is obtained through primarily extractive methods in a one-way, non-relational approach. And then that information is made sense of by the person who holds the power. It is combined with what they see fit, and then it is created in a way that they feel like is a way of conveying that narrative. So usually it is in the form of written word, in an article, in a journal that is then put behind a paywall, but let's not even get in there.
Yeah.
So I think, this is how we understand research to primarily happen and take place. And this is, I know I'm simplifying it and reducing it a little bit, but in general, these are our ideas and conceptions of how research happens. And where did these ideas come from? Were these always that way? Or is this more modern thought? And so when we think about how researchers have come to learn what research is and how research happens, they're learning these from institutions that have certain frameworks or approaches and methods that they teach. And then you get the professional certification of being a researcher, and you go about your day doing that very thing. When do we stop to question, what are the implications of this practice of research? Who do we harm? But also, what do we lose? What do we, even as researchers, lose about ourselves in the process of researching in this way? We lose connection. We lose relationship. We're told to be objective. We lose ourselves. And honestly, the outcomes of this method of practicing research are not that rich because of the ways in which they're done out of relationship. And so I think that's the first thing to really sit with when we talk about, how coloniality informs and manifests in our research practices. It's the very word and conception of research and how we've come to understand what it is. And so when we do this through our 5-week program, where we're walking researchers through really detangling coloniality, it is a very expansive and uncomfortable process of both reckoning, but also a liberating process of imagining what is possible. What could research be if we were to shed these layers and play a little bit in a way that remembers relationship is at the core of how research, as a practice of inquiry, as a practice of being in the relationship with knowledge and then sharing that knowledge with others. What could that look like if we were to step away from these frameworks and try something different or something old?
Yeah.
I think the only thing I'll add, I think you covered a lot of ground, Sabrina. The thing that I will add is that I've been thinking a lot about how research honestly has existed for millennia, right? And it has been a way to preserve knowledge too. And in the like modern way, we think of, oh, we're going to document it into like journal articles and papers. But I just think about like how it's preserved knowledge over generations, like knowledge that would have been lost, but it hasn't. And one of the things I've intentionally been doing is um my grandfather is like one of the last like living family members that we have who was there at the time of partition. And I've been like, just having conversations with him because I'm like, he's like about 90 now. And I'm like, I don't know how many years you have left, but it's like there's so much of this history that you just can't
Yeah.
find anywhere. It's firsthand account.
Yeah.
But from like the dominant narrative around research, people would be like, well, how do you like prove what he's saying? Or like,
Mm.
but it's just one sample size, you get into all
Yeah.
of these things. But I'm like, but he's drawing from a world of experiences and relationships and communities that he has been a part of in his life.
Yeah.
And to me, there's just something so rich and abundant of what is possible when we reclaim research as the practice of remembrance, as preserving knowledge, as like resistance, and like, defying the status quo, because that is how things were stolen from us, right? Like if you look at colonial histories across borders, one of the first things that people do, and this is very prevalent right now and what we're witnessing real time, is they destroy the libraries, they destroy the archives, they try to go after the journalists, the storytellers, the people who preserve the truth and the realities, right? And that throughout history has been how they've kind of in like enacted colonial like norms, and then even taking culture from us and putting it into museums as archives, right? Like it's you're disconnecting it. That's what I think about research in the modern sense, is like you take knowledge away from a place, from a people, from a community, and then you decontextualize it and then try to make it into something different, almost like a display, right? Like a performance. And yeah, so I think part of deconstructing that is like really thinking about like how do we return that knowledge to the people and places where it comes from. And yeah, I'll kind of leave it at that.
Yeah. And I mean, I love that you were both talking about, there is nothing like being objective. We all carry our baggages, we all have our point of views. And when it comes to research, you almost have this agreement that this is the truth. And the same comes when you were talk history, it's like this is our truth. It's not even our truth, the truth.
The truth.
And so I think it's really important, as you were saying, that we need to remember that everything we share and everything we collect at the end are stories, and are stories of people around us or people far from us. But at the end, even research should be connected, to this relationship, because at the end, those are the richest thing that we can hold and we can archive and we can pass through generation. And it's not about being, you know exactly what happened, because sometimes stories even change so much. But it's more a matter of what do you do then with that story? How do you act? And I think it's really important that we understand that it's fine when something is not scientifically based. Because if it's not scientifically based, or maybe we should start to say that stories can be scientifically based,
What is
because we are
science
not
also?
perfect as science or research would like to let us, believe. And I think that's probably, I mean, that's our beauty. And we were talking about perfection at the beginning. So you see, we are coming back to it. And there is nothing like perfect, or maybe our non-perfection is what makes us perfect, probably. Who knows?
Yeah, I love that. And yeah, I mean, as you were all mentioning, and again, another feeling of kind of grief comes up of like, what could word be, or our knowledge systems, how could they look like if we wouldn't have made it this limited based on, the way that we define research and knowledge systems and all of that. And, as you were saying, and going back to relationships and how everything is about relationships, our research, the definition that we have right now also always create a person that is the researcher, and then the rest are the researchy or the ones that are being researched. Whereas, you know, I really love, replacing the word research with knowledge creation, because it's really a process of a collective process. It's not an expertise process, but we are always together creating knowledge. And yeah, it's relational, like, and it's through conversation, and it's through, you know, yeah, again, I hate that there is a person that their job is to do research and the rest are being researched, whereas it's much more collective and relational, and a process that the whole community creates knowledge together through research, through learning from the land, from each other, from ourselves, from our souls. And yeah, again, what could have been is the sadness in the heart. But I mean, you're doing that work, so it's good. You got this. You got it for all of us.
Now we'll do it together.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah. So I guess last question.
Or
Can-
I think
Yeah,
we
or
need
we
to maybe also allow the guests.
to leave.
Yeah, I think.
Not last question. Oh, we can make it super short. So because we had some tips on how in our personal sphere we could start, the decolonization process. Of course, it's just tips like that we have personally. But so, which tips would you give to do the same, but when it comes to, research and design processes? Just short and snappy if you need to go, of course.
I think honestly, the first thing is really noticing, right? Like a lot of the times we've just been told to accept things as reality, like kind of what you were saying earlier about like the truth. And to me, sometimes it's just like creating a, entry point to be like, well, what if we did this differently? And allowing ourselves to notice what is already present, right? Like where it's like even this desire to like, oh, we're always like taught like innovate. Like I talked about this already, like modernity and like the way we think about innovation and like how things in the past were just outdated and we're like, creating something new all the time. But it's just like sometimes it's really just a matter of noticing what's already happening around us. And how people are already engaging in different practices and then allowing ourselves to kind of be present for that because there's just a lot of richness and abundance. So for me, I think a lot of like my own curiosity around this topic just started from that, like just being present, allowing myself to notice, be curious, inquire. Like, what if we did things differently? What if we didn't accept this as the truth or the reality that we've been fed or that's been constructed? And that kind of seeps into like what it means to start imagining beyond like this colonial imaginary, because it is constructed, right?
Yeah.
It isn't our realities or our collective realities either. Yeah, I think that's the short answer, but that's what comes up.
Thank you.
I would say in tandem with that is being able to work on your ability to tolerate discomfort where possible.
Oh, yes.
Because as you reckon and as you notice, there's a sense of discomfort that comes up as you choose to make change, there's a sense of discomfort that comes up. And if we just are always in this place of suppressing that or choosing comfort instead, choosing to move away from the truth, then we are not like opening the portals for possibility, right? And so
Mhm.
discomfort is almost a portal for us to lean into so that other possibilities can open up. And yes, it does start with this reflection, but I can share so many different stories in my life where I've noticed things about myself. Those are really uncomfortable things to sit with and truth tell. And I've had to do that despite the discomfort in order to arrive at another place in the journey. And I say journey because I'm still gonna have to confront my own discomfort again and my own complicity, and it's just never ending. But as you build this capacity for discomfort, it starts to feel easier in a way of like navigating that. So I would say that's a big step as well.
Thank you.
Khadija, can I add to that?
Sure. And then you can even wrap up.
Thank you. I was just reflecting on research and the way that it seeks to create a logical response, a mathematical, right, this is certainty. So it seeks to create certainty about the question that is posed. And in that search, logic is higher in that search. There's a hierarchy that's been created, which is logic and numbers mean more than feelings and stories and remembering all the things that you've all talked about. And I suppose my reflection is what is don't sitting with the discomfort, as you've just both sort of said it in your own ways and directly, is don't meaning make. And that's the thing that I find the hardest in myself, is not to make meaning of things and see what unfolds. Because the brain, the education, the society, like everything's geared me towards making meaning of everything. And actually the ancestral work that we do to heal is to sit with it and not make meaning of it and see what emerges. So and I know that we've sort of all said that in different ways. So thank you so much. I mean, I know it's morning for you guys, but like for us, well, for me it's evening, and it's a bit later for you in Italy. But I just think what an amazing way to finish a week for me. Thank you so much. I have learned so much from this discussion today, from yourselves, Sabrina and Maya. Then more power to your elbow for the work that you are doing. And as Arizu said earlier, you're carrying a perspective on changing systems, thinking and feelings in a way that we're all very grateful for and need more people doing. So thank you so much for your time today. And I really hope that our paths cross.
Yes.
Yeah. Any last reflections from you both, Sabrina and Mayad?
I don't think so, but just wanted to extend gratitude for holding this space. And there's a lot to revisit, go back to as well in this conversation. And yeah, just feeling a lot of gratitude, a lot of resonance, and what was shared. Yeah.
Yeah, this was a beautiful conversation. I appreciated the way that you all engaged and shared your own stories and brought life into that conversation. So thank you so much. And to the listeners as well, just hoping that you move through this gently and take your time with this recording, because there's a lot in here. And I know that bodies that are maybe newer to the subject can find it overwhelming to stomach all of this as well. So just moving through with the grace.
Thank you, Sabrina.
Thank you. I think you closed the conversation with care, and I don't want to say anything else. Thank you, really, for being with us for this hour. This was so rich. Thank you.